They actually stopped the production of printing any other patterns just to print this pattern back in the 1950s. And one of the big selling features was the fact that you could start it after breakfast and walk away at lunch with a dress that is made. Let's put it to the test. Hello makers, Catherine here from Sheer Stitchery. And today I am going to be stitching up a vintage 1950s pattern, which was coined the WalkAway dress. It's actually Butterick 6015. And the reason why it was called the WalkAway dress is because it was sold as a garment that you could complete between breakfast and walk away at lunchtime wearing a fully completed dress. And so back in the 1950s, this pattern sold like hotcakes and everybody was stitching it up. And I actually came across a challenge by Stephanie Canada, a fellow YouTuber. I will link her channel down below. And I came late to the game for this challenge here. I actually found out about the challenge about a couple of days before it was ending. So I reached out to her and I am happy to share this with you. I am not able to partake in the challenge because the challenge is now closed, even as I am filming this right now. So what is that challenge? Can you really create this dress from the time after you've had breakfast until your lunch date and actually walk away in that? And the winner of that challenge is the person who stitches it up the fastest. Now, I am not going to worry about looking at the clock when I am making this. I don't want to do a super speedy sew. I want to stitch it up as if I were in the 1950s and I were legitimately wanting to create this dress. Now, I just got home from work here, so I thought that I would start by constructing it. So I'm not actually doing it in one day. I want to make sure I get this video out in a timely manner, timed with that challenge here, and the way in which to do that is for me to start it in pieces. So it is evening and I am going to start by doing the construction of it, and then I am going to stop for the night and do all of that bias binding on the next day. So I know that is not part of the challenge, but it is the way that I'm going to do it just because I have to head away for a work trip and I'm going to be gone for a couple of days. So I wouldn't be able to get this out for quite some time if I didn't start it right now. So I'm going to go head upstairs. I've already got the fabric that I have in mind to use it. I'm actually going to use a viscose fabric. I know a lot of people that are creating this and doing this challenge tend to use a quilting cotton. And the fabric that they do suggest within the pattern, so the fabric that they do suggest is crepe taffeta. So the taffeta is going to have like a really stiff drape to it and it's really going to kind of hold that shape. Satin, velveteen, so like a thicker fabric as well, shunting, gingham, chambray, cotton prints, linen, pique, and cotton broadcloth. So definitely fabrics that have a little bit more body to them. So I'm actually creating mine in a viscose, which is not a suggested fabric. My fabric has a ton of drape to it. And when I have these nice voluminous circle skirts, I really like creating them in these more drapey fabrics because they can give a more modern silhouette. But if I want that classic 1950s silhouette, all I have to do is add a petticoat underneath. Now, this particular dress, because it is a wrap dress in the way that it is styled, if I were to put a petticoat under, it wouldn't work because it's kind of tighter along that front bodice piece. I would have to actually custom create a petticoat. This is a cult classic from the 50s. And I think that it is definitely something that I really wanted to do. Now, one other thing that I wanted to note before I get started is this is an actual vintage pattern. This is actually a vintage pattern. It's not the reproduction. So Butterick actually came out with a reproduction version of this. And I will link a video down below that Stephanie has done that compared the two. They are drastically different. Seriously, Butterick, what were you thinking? I am very glad that she gave the actual 1952 pattern from this. Now it's only in one size, and within those measurements, though it is a bust 32, we have a decent amount of ease built into this. And in terms of that ease in the bust and waist area, I am going to create my first muslin without any adjustments to it, because I think that it could fit. And one of the things that I find with modern patterns, I often have to do a full bust adjustment. And in vintage patterns, I find for whatever reason, and maybe it's because all of them love to wear girdles, I don't have to do that full bust adjustment as much. I am going to do it as is. And part of that challenge, because it was only the one size that was given as that pattern, we don't have to time creating up that muslin and making any pattern alterations. We need to get that sizing correct. And one of the biggest things in order for your dress to look great when it's done is doing that muslin, especially when it is with a pattern you're not familiar with, or maybe it's not your exact size. So I'm going to use some old bed sheets that I found at the thrift store and cut them up and turn them into a muslin. So let's get stitching that up.
So number one, the muslin toile. So with this, I am going to do the first page here. And the first thing we need to do is look at the sizes, because it comes in just one size here. So on the actual pattern that was sent to me here, it shows the finished garment measurements. This is such a time saver when developing this. So right here, we have our bust, waist, and hip measurement, and then the estimated ease within that. So I decided to take those measurements and start to adjust that pattern and do up my muslin. So in this instance, I decided to kind of keep everything as is, see how it fits based on that ease, and if I needed to remove anything with this. So I am just going to cut it out as I normally would if I were making the dress, and I'm just transferring all of those marks just the way you would do when you're actually making the dress here. So I had finished this up, and you can see here there is a significant amount of extra up at the shoulder seam. And from other videos that I have watched on this, because it was a challenge, a lot of people had the same issue with this. So I am just taking this in and I am putting the pins in so that I can get an idea of where it is. And I actually use safety pins to tie the front together here with that. Another thing that I noticed was on the bust area, it just needs to come in on the side dart just a wee bit. And then under the arm where it comes and wraps around, it was actually going onto the side of my bust, and I wanted it under the bust. I thought that was a bit more flattering, so I adjusted the lines there. Next, I am just going to take my marker here, and this is a water-soluble marker, and I am just going to trace over where I want my new sleeve to go. Now with this, we don't have to worry about seam allowances because we are attaching bias binding, so wherever that seam ends, that is where it's going to stay. It's not going to get any smaller. So I wanted to take that in on the shoulders, and then I am just marking where I would like it taken in on the front, and you only need to do half that side for those markings. And then I still think that there's a little bit left in the shoulders here, so I took a little bit more out. And then I am just marking that. I've left the pins in, and then you can go ahead and remove those pins. And now we have the markings that we can then transfer to our pattern to adjust them so that they fit your body here. And so I have the adjustments done on the bust piece as well. And I just used an elastic with 2 safety pins to hold that back piece together, by the way. And then I am drawing on where I had adjusted these after stitching those darts together there. So you can see there's a decent amount that I am stripping out of this pattern just to get it to fit me. And every body is different, so you will need to adjust for your specific body. So I am just taking these measurements and dividing them by 2 because we have a front and a back piece, and I want them to be even. So you can see how I've pinned, they're not exactly even. You want to make sure that what you're taking out of the front and the back is pretty much even. Otherwise, your dress is going to slope either to the front or the back, depending on how that is. So I am just going in here and I am reducing this. So I'm just adding this on, and don't forget to add in the seam allowances there. as well. And I'm actually writing what I am doing on my pattern. I love to do that on paper patterns, which is why I tend not to use projector patterns as much, even though I have a projector. And it's because it provides notes on the alterations that I did to that pattern at that particular time. And as you look to grow and change body shapes, sometimes you're making those adjustments, but it's nice to know what you did to that original pattern. So I'm just using my French curve to kind of go in here and make that armhole edge and just kind of curve that just a wee little bit. And one of the things that I found really helpful, especially on the back piece, is I just laid the pattern on top of the piece that I wore. And then I took my tracing wheel. This one actually happens to be for my leather craft, but they have one specifically for sewing. I just couldn't find it in my stash. Really need to do an organizing video on that because my sewing space is a bit chaotic right now. And then I'm just going in and doing a very gentle sloping curve on that front portion here that goes to the waist. So I am just going to trim this down. And then I have the bust dart that we need to increase in size. So I calculated how much more I need to take out, and I am just going to add that in along the dart. And then I am going to repunch these holes and actually put tape over the holes that I had already punched just for that. So next, I am just going to add in this seam allowance just on the back because I actually forgot to add that one in when I was adjusting that on the first instance here. I wanted it to go a little bit better, and then I am going to adjust the center front as well, just to give it a little extra when it comes along the front. Now, the nice thing about having the elastic in the back is it makes it very, very adjustable in terms of that sizing along your waist and the hips. Because it's a circle skirt, you got tons of sizing. Now let's get to sewing. This is when we start the clock here. So I am just taking out my fabric. I have pre-washed and dried this, so it's all pre-shrunk, but this fabric I don't think really shrinks very much at all. Absolutely love the drapiness of this fabric here. And I'm just laying the pattern pieces on, and I'm going to cut them out with my rotary cutter and my cutting mat. This is my preferred method to cut out any pattern. It is more precise and it is also much faster than scissors. So I'm using a combination of my marker and chalk because this has light as well as very dark areas, and I want to make sure that I'm getting all of my markings in on this because it has a couple of odd darts. As you can see, those fun placement and shape of those darts, which I absolutely love from vintage patterns. You don't see that in a lot of traditional patterns. They make things really simple, which is great. I get it. But these vintage patterns have these elements that you don't always see, and I absolutely love them. And looking at incorporating certain things like that into some of the garments that I like to drape myself as well. And so, of course, we're going to cut out the back portion here, and then don't forget to leave enough fabric for your lovely circle skirt as well. So in this, I did go ahead and trim it a little bit because when I had it on the fold, as you can see, it is not ironed. Do iron your fabric. I was naughty and didn't iron it, and so it didn't cut out exactly as precisely as it probably should have. And then I'm just going to draw on those dart marks. So our time here, we're almost at about 20 minutes, and I am going to go ahead and pin these back darts. So I like to place the pins along both sides in the direction that I'm going to be sewing, just to make it a little bit easier. So back is all done. We're going to stitch that up, and super easy, back stitch at the very start of that dart, and when you get to the end, do not back stitch. You want to hand tie it off about 2 or 3 times. It's going to reduce that bulk. And so you're going to do that on both sides of your darts here. And we are now sitting at about 25 minutes. I'm just going to clip those thread tails here. And then we're going to do the darts for the front. This is a bit more complicated. So I went ahead and I slashed in along that side dart here, just so that we can access it a little bit better. And so the first one that we're going to stitch is going to be the side dart. So not that big long one that goes perpendicular, but you want the one that goes horizontally across that bust dart. I found that was the easiest way to stitch it in place, but at the same time, we can go ahead and pin that center front dart. So that's that diamond shaped dart that goes down the center, not the one that intersects with that bust dart. So we can pin both of them. And when you're doing this diamond shaped dart and actually stitching it in place, you don't want to backstitch at all because you are not actually starting at the edge of a fabric. You are starting at the very tip. And so you are going to just leave long thread tails and just begin and stitch and then tie off the end. And then when you come back to the beginning, you're going to tie that off again. So I went ahead and I did that. And then I also am going to press this. So you notice that I am pressing this prior to sewing those vertical darts that go down and intersect that bust dart. And this is really important because you want the fabric to lie nice and flat. I also go ahead and press these ones, and I'm pressing them out towards the edges of the bodice here. Okay, so now that we have that, we can work on the other darts. Now, it's really critical to make sure that that top bust dart is pressed nicely because we want this to lay nice and flat along the body. So I like to put my pins in on the areas or those dots on your pattern pieces that you want it to intersect, and then line the patterns up as we continue to go down. I find that this works the best with all of the darts, and it's the very same with this one. And you're going to treat this one just like a regular kind of diamond dart that ends, but it does intersect and go through that bust dart. It looks much more complicated on the pattern than it is, and do be sure to do those slash marks. The pattern does indicate that you have those slash marks. So just make sure to snip into that. It might seem scary, but it will help everything to lie nice and flat. So I have stitched that up, and then I'm going to press that out towards the edges or side seams of the dress. And I'm going to actually iron all the fabric now. And you can see I've got this little overhang along each of the edges. I am not sure if anyone else got that, but for whatever reason, maybe I made some adjustments. I just decided to clip it off, and it was perfect. It did not matter at all. This right here is our circle skirt for the bottom portion of the back of the dress. So you're just going to match it up along the edge of the back and stitch it. And I stitched it, and then I am going to use my duckbill scissors to grade the seam allowances here. I am not using a serger because in the 1950s, overlockers were not readily available. So do you know what I'm going to do to finish my seams? I'm going to press them up just like so. So definitely not zigzagging. I could, but I didn't want to. I am going to do a flat fell seam. This is a lightweight fabric, and I think a flat fell seam will look really beautiful on this. And yes, this took me longer. Could have I done it quicker without doing this? Yes, I could have. Did I want to? No, I didn't. And so I decided to do that. And then our next step is attaching them at the shoulder seams. Yes, we are going quickly. And you will notice, Catherine, why are you placing them wrong sides together? You're sewing the shoulder seams. Haha. Well, remember how we are finishing the edges. I'm just going to take my pinking shears. I am going to grade that down to about 1/8 of an inch. Then I'm going to press it. And have you guessed what we're going to do yet? I am folding it right sides together now. Yes, we are going to do a French seam along these shoulder seams because we want everything to be beautifully finished on the inside and last for a very long time. So I have that all finished. I'm just trimming out this excess. Once again, we had little areas that didn't line up. I did adjust the armholes there, so that might have been why. Number 3, we're going to hang this for 24 hours. So here we go. I've got it up on the dress form here, and we are going to step away. Okay, so I am back from my trip, and today is the day that I am going to do all of the bias binding. But first, let's head on up to my office and check to see how much the skirt has actually dropped. And number 4, all that bias binding. So I'm using pre-made bias binding because I wanted to do a black one. And in this challenge, you are allowed to use the bias binding pre-made or make your binding before starting the clock. Hence the reason I am not counting making any of that binding, especially since this is pre-bought. So on this, one of the tips that I have is to hold the back end of your bias binding when you start so it doesn't get sucked down. So I am just sandwiching my fabric in between that bias binding, and just stitching along there. And as long as you're following, on top of that, you're pretty good that you're going to get both ends as long as you're going slow and careful on that. So you can see at the end, I'm just pulling that one edge so that I can really get it going. So I also wanted to kind of show you when we look at getting to some curves, and in this case, it is the corner. So we want to miter this corner. So we're going to fold it down, and I like to use a little clip here so that I can do the other edge in, but you're going to miter it very similar to how you would miter like a quilt blanket. If you've ever done that, I've got a couple of videos, I'll link them down below, on quilting and the binding there.
Okay, so I have just finished trimming off the bottom of the skirt there so that everything's all nice and even, and I did time that. That took me just over 5 minutes. I'll put the time up here for you guys to see. And now I am going to actually follow some of the instructions that Stephanie Canada gave in her challenge, and that was to make a nice hot beverage, whether that is coffee or tea, just something while you sew. So I'm actually going to prepare some right now, and then I'm going to head up and do all of the bias binding. Now, originally I would have grabbed my bias binding foot. It makes things so much faster and easier. That being said, because we do have corners on here, when I was reading through the pattern instructions and we have to miter them, it's going to be a pain in the butt to do that. And though they did have bias binding presser feet in the 1950s, they weren't readily available to home sewers. So I am going to follow that vintage adage and just do it how I would have done if I were in the 1950s with my regular old presser foot. So let's get to it and start that clock again.
Okay, all that bias binding. So I am using pre-made bias binding because I wanted a solid black, but in the challenge, you are allowed to, not on the clock, create your own bias binding. So I am starting the clock again so we can time how long this step takes us. So because I want to do this in a quick manner, one of the ways that I found to be pretty much the easiest as well to install bias binding without using a foot is just sandwiching your fabric in between that bias binding. So when you're going over the curves of this, you want to be very careful that you're kind of pushing that fabric into the bias binding so that you're catching that fabric between both of the layers. If you go slow, it can help. Also, pull that end of the tail of the bias binding when you're starting, or make a longer tail. That helps tremendously so it doesn't get stuck in that feed dogs. Next, the corners. So we want to miter the corners, and you're just going to fold it at 90 degrees. I like to place a little clip along that miter right there, and then position the rest of my fabric within there, and then place another clip, and then stitch it. And it's very similar to how you would miter a corner if you've ever bound a blanket when you're quilting. And next, we have the neck edge. So that's a round curved edge. So for this, I decided to start my edge just with that open bias binding, and I put the bottom of the edge on the underarm seam so that you don't see it from either the front or the back. It's where my arms are going to hang down, and I'm just going to overlap it. And I didn't fold it over or do anything fancy like that. I am just finishing it as is. It's on the bias. It's not going to fray. So we see all these little tails. I am just going to clip off all my bias binding tails. And if you're using pre-made packages, I believe I used 4 packages. You got a couple of, offshoots hanging off the end, but pretty much that all 4 of those packages are going to do, yeah. So next we have the hem, and the pattern calls for hem tape. And so it's basically like this little really thin ribbon stuff. And so you would basically stitch it on and then fold it up, and you'd have this beautiful, nice little edge right here. So that's how you would go ahead and attach that just along the edge like so, going over. I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I just want to do a double fold hem. I think that that's going to be a lot easier and probably, easier for me to get that in place. So what I am going to do here is I'm actually first going to stitch on this hem tape. So I stitched all the way around where I would like it, and I stitched it up a bit higher, and I'm trimming it off because I wanted it to be a little bit shorter than where it was sitting when I had my muslin on. It was just a little bit long for my personal preference, and I do like a midi length. But in this particular instance, I wanted to trim it down just a wee bit. So that is why that is not right against the edge, and I'm having to actually go ahead and trim this back. So now that that's trimmed, we're going to go ahead and press this, because we want this to sit nicely. So I'm going in with my iron, some nice steam, and we're going to press it. And the great thing about hemming a circle skirt in this way is you don't have to worry about when you're doing a double fold hem or a really narrow hem. Sometimes you get that pleating and that puckering, especially if it's wider than what you want. Whereas with this, it is quite nice because you have that stretching of that hem tape. So I'm just going in and I'm not making a very wide seam along here for that hem, and I'm just tucking the ends in and kind of mitering them along the ends here. And so I'm just getting that pressed and then going in and getting it all stitched up. So I actually went back and stitched that, so you can see it's all top stitched, and it kind of does match that bias binding that we have with the black hem tape on the inside. So if you catch a glimpse of the inside, it still looks really beautiful. Okay, number 5, we're going to attach those fasteners. So we are going to use some elastic here, and we've got an elastic guide based on the sizes, and on this one I'm going to do the 4 inches, I believe, that it calls for, and I'm going to use a pants fastener. So I'm using a bar and a hook for pants making because I think that that's going to be stronger, and I am waxing my thread because I want it to be stronger. In hindsight, I probably should have grabbed either my upholstery thread or my nylon thread that I like to use for my leather making, because that is going to be much stronger than this polyester thread that I am stitching on here. So on the one end, you are going to stitch the fastener to the elastic. And then on the other end, so that little bar, that is going to get attached to the dress. And this is the front piece of our dress. Okay, so when you're attaching it, you'll see these kind of like 2 little markings, and it's on the pattern, and that is because it is going to go on the back and fasten on the back here. Next, we are going to add the buttons and the loops for the front clasp here. And so with this, I am just using some narrow bias binding. In here, I am taking the width of the button and then I'm stitching across there. Give a little extra room. I did mine slightly too tight because I wanted it to be nice and close to the edge and not have that double bias binding seam, making it look a little bit thicker than the rest of the bias binding for a design feature. But I probably should have given myself an extra 1/8 of an inch. Then stitch them on. I am going to just trim those edges, and then one of our final steps here, we're going to attach those buttons. And I'm just using my chalk to mark where I had placed those because I did not measure. I did 0 measuring. This is a timed thing. And I stitched them on. I stitched them on by machine, kind of cheating. Not sure if they had that in the 50s. I need to fact check that. But I don't think they did. So maybe slightly cheating. I probably should have done that by hand. Why don't you add, a minute or 2 onto my time for the final, for the hand sewing of the buttons here. And so I'm just doing it up, and it is a bit fiddly. I regretted doing it so close at this point here. Okay, now for the final reveal.
Let it go, what's the use in holding on? Can we find a way where we could spend some time alone? You know where to find me, you know which way to go. As long as you love me, we'll be singing all night long.
Okay, so it is all done. I have stopped the clock, put on the dress. I also did my hair and makeup so that we could go and take some photos. And then I am going to take my dear son out for lunch as well. So let's find out, is it actually possible to stitch this up after having breakfast and before you head out for a lunch event? Let's find out. So my numbers were chopped up. It wasn't just one at a time because I did take some time in between. So day 1, I had constructed the dress. So I did all of the darts as well as the shoulder seams and attached the back skirt. So that took me 1 hour, 6 minutes and 7.65 seconds to complete that before I stopped the clock. Then I decided to pop on the dress onto my dress form. Now, because the skirt is a circle skirt and it is cut on the bias, it is going to stretch. It's the nature of the game. And if you've ever stitched a circle skirt or anything on the bias, you always, for at least 24 hours, have to let it hang because the fibers are going to stretch and it's going to get pulled down in those areas that are on the bias. They're going to be a lot longer. Now, next, I started the clock when I was actually fixing the hem for that. So the vast majority of people who were doing this, they completely didn't let it hang and skipped this step. But that was an additional 5 minutes, 36 seconds to fix that hem, to go in and just true everything up. And then after, so then we get to starting the clock up again when I'm actually doing the bias binding, the hem, as well as adding the buttons and the back elastic piece. Now that took me 1 hour, 19 minutes, 22.29 seconds to complete. So here are the final numbers. So the final numbers for that, without fixing the hem or letting it hang at all, I would have came in at 2 hours, 25 minutes, and 29 seconds. Not bad. Definitely something that you could stitch up after breakfast and wear to lunch. But do you want to do that? Because eventually your hem is going to drop and it's going to be uneven and it's going to look bad. It might look good that day, and if you were wearing it for longer than several hours, it might start to drop as you're wearing it. So if we're going to include the numbers of me fixing the hem, it is going to be 2 hours, 31 minutes, and 5 seconds plus 24 hours to let that hang. Now that's not including the time it took me to put together the fitting and getting all the sizing right. Now I did get the sizing decent on that, but I am seeing just in this crisscross, it is a little bit looser, and I did notice that my neckline is a bit looser as well. So I'm almost wondering if, because it's on that bias, that it did stretch a little bit, and what I probably should have done was stay stitched that neck edge so that it didn't stretch as I was putting the bias binding on. And I'm sure that might be in the instructions. I read them through, oh goodness, now it's probably several days since I read them through. I read them through when I first got them, and I'm the type of sewist that I don't actually consult the instructions as I'm stitching it up. I just kind of remember the order of operations on how to do that. But otherwise, I'm actually really pleased with this dress. I think it's really unique in terms of how it comes together and the fact that it could be really nicely adjustable because you've got that elastic in the back. So you can gain and lose weight and it's still going to fit you quite nicely with that. One thing I did mention is I didn't like the loops that I used. So I used a thinner bias binding to create the loops, but I didn't leave enough room to get my buttons through with great ease. I actually struggled to get the buttons on and off. Getting them on is a little bit easier than getting them off. Now, this pattern says it has two views, view A and view B. Now, view A is what I had stitched up here, all in the same fabric. View B is the exact same pattern, except you're using a different fabric for the front and back pieces of the dress, so you get a two-toned effect, which is actually really rather beautiful. In this instance, I wanted to go with a monochromatic look because I already had this fabric in my stash. I actually got this from Minerva. It's a custom designed fabric, only sold through them. I'll link that down below if you want to check it out. Washes up like a dream, and I can really see myself utilizing this, especially in these tonal colors, for a lot of different seasons. Because it's a lighter weight fabric, I know I'm going to wear this in spring and summer as an easy sundress. And because it's got these nice autumnal colors, I'm going to wear it in autumn and winter, and I might even put a turtleneck on underneath it to just kind of give me a little extra warmth and layering within this dress. So, at the end of the day, is it possible? Yes, but do you want to do that? Because your hem is it's going to stretch. I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna stretch. You don't want that. Take the time, but this was a fabulous challenge. I had a ton of fun with it. And if you decide to make up this dress, whether it is the new version or if you actually get your hands on a copy of the original pattern here, do let me know in the comments down below. As well, what are your thoughts on these wrap style dresses? I know a lot of people think they look like aprons, but I'm actually really digging it, and I love the fact that they're adjustable and can kind of grow with you. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.